Hey, everybody. Thank you for coming back and joining us at Therapist Uncensored. We are thrilled to have you and could not be more excited to introduce you to our guest today. Linda Ty, I'm going to read a bio that I found about you online that is it is my fantasy bio. So it says you're a freelance educator, storyteller, group facilitator, collaborator, infiltrator, cross-pollinator, and community builder. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Sue.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of why I'm so excited to have you is, where your perspective in the world and where that you are leading us. And I would love to hear, if you don't mind, sharing, first of all, just to give people context a little bit about your story, just briefly. I really love the trajectory, and I had mentioned before we got on that it's sort of, I think of that when in launching my kids. It's like, okay, let's, people will find themselves wherever they begin, hopefully. That's part of our work together. So you were born in South Vietnam?
Yes. So I was born in South Vietnam just after the fall of Saigon, so the end of the Vietnam War. And my family are former Vietnamese boat people. So I'm a former child refugee, and my parents are also refugees. And, it's taken the entirety of my life to actually grasp the context within which the circumstances of my becoming into this world arose. And I felt so bereft in the world. I had parents where we didn't even speak the same language as each other because I'm living in Australia with them, and yet they speak Vietnamese. And I'm having struggles with mental health issues, with addiction. I felt this huge gulf between us, and yet this immense desire to try and make sense of myself and of them and of my life. And it was well into my 30s that I was able to go, traditional psychology says, what's wrong with you? Trauma-informed psychology says, what happened to you? Yeah.
And that being its own journey, right?
Yes.
What happened to you? Yeah.
Yeah. And then culturally informed psychology says, what happened to your people? And liberation psychology says, and what continues to happen to your people? And to be able to have discovered Alaska, where I live these days, on the traditional lands of the Dene Athabaskan peoples of the Middle Tanana Valley, has allowed me enough bandwidth to be able to unpack all of that, because there's so many layers to the context that no one explained to me.
What a journey of finding things that aren't there. That, it's one thing to be able to point to something entirely different to point and not have it there.
Yeah. Yes. I experienced an immense series of light bulbs going off when I discovered Gabor Mate's work, and then when I discovered Bessel van der Kolk's work, specifically The Body Keeps the Score. And yet when I read The Body Keeps the Score, it was so evident to me that I was a trauma survivor. I had all the symptoms, but I didn't have a trauma that I could pin something onto. And then when I went asking my parents about it, I discovered all of the refugee trauma that was there for us. And yet growing up in our household, there was simply benign neglect. And so a part of me has been feeling like I'm looking for a trauma or traumas or abuse that perhaps doesn't exist. And it's only been in the last couple of years that I've actually unpacked the impact of racialized trauma and the ways in which the invisible wounds of racialized trauma has impacted me psychically, psychologically, impacted how I move through the world as well as my worldview, which has then given me pause and has made me very passionate about sharing about this into the world.
Well, wonderful.
And
we are all ears. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't want to. I don't want to.
Yeah, and it was emergent today, right? Just earlier in our interview, where I started going through traditional psychology and then trauma informed psychology, and there was a pause, and and it was, and you interjected, and I was like, no, there's more. Yeah, around culturally informed psychology and liberation psychology, and yet I never learnt about that in graduate school. And so many of our listeners who are professionals don't learn about it in graduate school. Yeah.
Or after graduate school.
Or after graduate school. And so I feel in so many ways that we're all at this cutting edge where it's messy and we're having these conversations, and yet there are pioneers in this field who are leading us that little bit further. And it comes back to the liberation psychology ethos that centres the first person narrative, the testimonial, as of utmost importance when we are exploring the voices of those who inhabit bodies that are marginalised by society. Because we don't get researched, not by us, about us, for us. And yet when we start to speak up, we then get met with, where's the research behind this? Oh, this is just your lived experience. Oh, we can dismiss that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When it doesn't fit our pre-existing unconscious projections about how the world works and what is security and what is not security. And it's one of I'm so delighted to talk with you to help us expand our ideas about that. But if we could go half a step back not half a step, but this is really into it, which is racialized trauma. Can you say more about what you mean about that?
Yeah.
And kind of your personal experience of how that's impacted you?
Yeah. So here's where I just want to pause and acknowledge the works of Dr. Kenneth Hardy and Resmaa Menakem, amongst many others, but they've been my two main teachers in this field. And when we look at racialized trauma, it happens within a context, and that context also happens over time. Yeah. And this is where, if I just name some of the invisibilized wounds of racialized trauma, and this is Dr. Kenneth Hardy's work. Yeah. It's an assaulted sense of self. It's internalized devaluation, learned voicelessness, psychological homelessness, complex and ambiguous grief and loss, survival orientation, and rage. And within that, I would also add internalized idealization of the characteristics of those in power. And whenever I do my PowerPoint presentations and draw upon Dr. Kenneth Hardy's work, I actually put up that list. And people sit there and go, wow, I get that. Yeah, as a complex developmental trauma survivor, I get all of those things. right? An assaulted sense of self, internalized devaluation, internalized idealization of the qualities of the person in power, learned voicelessness, psychological homelessness, complex and ambiguous grief and loss, survival orientation and rage. And then I say these, according to Dr. Kenneth Hardy, are the invisibilized wounds of racialized trauma. And that's where we hear that gasp. And that's where, for many of us, we then become aware of how so many of the conversations that we have around race, around heterosexism, around cisgenderism, around ableism, around sexism, how it's so easy for us to default to our subjugated selves. How it's so easy for us to default to that part of us that so deeply knows these wounds. And part of the work of allyship is being able to recognise this, do our own work around those parts of us that are wounded, so that we can hold out or hold forward those parts of ourselves for which this conversation is about. Whether the conversation is about whiteness, or the conversation is about ableism, or the conversation is about the patriarchy, or if the conversation is about transphobism, because it's so easy for us to go pear-shaped. We veer off the train tracks. It goes wobbly. And for me to pause and go, wow, where does this work land for me? For me to recognise that so much of my core wounding around shame, and while I love the work of Dr. Brene Brown, I got so much out of that for myself as well as for my clients. I worked in addiction recovery for over 10 years. And we learned that all the ways in which we numb out and protect ourselves from shame get in the way of authenticity, and they get in the way of authentic belonging. And yet when it comes to that piece about racialized trauma, racism is not about belonging. Racism is not about not fitting in or not belonging. Racism is about dignity. And so where are the spaces where we can experience safety, physical safety as well as psychological safety, and agency? Because when you combine physical and psychological safety with agency, there's then the capacity for authentic self-expression, for taking up space, for the dignity of mattering. And a byproduct of that dignity is belonging.
That is beautiful. And you had mentioned a Kenneth Hardy quote before we got on that was really meaningful to you. Would this be a good place to...
Yes. Oh, thank you for that reminder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he says so many brilliant things and they rattle around inside of me. And one of the things that he says is that when we inhabit a body that's racialized by society, we're too busy defending ourselves. We're always defending ourselves. It's that assaulted sense of self. And so we don't get to then define ourselves. And when we do define ourselves, we're defining ourselves in terms of who we are not, rather than who we are. And even when we are defining ourselves in terms of who we are, other people are then trying to compartmentalize us or figure us out in relationship to
the group or the category. Yes. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, the group, the categories, the stereotypes. So there then exists the opportunity or the possibility within myself to lean towards the stereotype, because all stereotypes arise for a reason, and we each inhabit various aspects of that stereotype. And part of my task is to lean towards that stereotype without feeling like I then need to defend myself. Yeah. Yeah.
I get what you're saying, especially in context with the quote, that if we're pressing against something, I'm gay, but I'm not XYZ,
Yeah.
that we're missing, that we can miss, like it's still a disownment of potentially parts of ourselves. Would you be comfortable saying like how that applies in your case? Like if you were to lean into it, like what do you get the benefit of moving into in yourself that you might otherwise, miss or not even know?
Sure. So when I was defining myself in terms of who I am not, what that butts up against for me is white proximity as a survival strategy, male proximity as a survival strategy, and internalizing qualities of whiteness and maleness, and rejecting aspects of my own cultural identity. Yeah. And so that's the painful part, right? The parts of myself that I gave away in order to survive. Yeah. Where it's giving away aspects of identity, of culture, of language, of food, of heritage that I actually never got the chance to fully inhabit as a result of the forced displacement of being a former child refugee. Mm-hmm. And the complex and ambiguous grief that arises as a result of acknowledging and recognising all of that. And then leaning towards what could open up for me. And then there's also the stereotypes of Asians as being smart, as having the answer, of being emotionally unavailable and not being able to be trustworthy because I say no when I mean yes and say yes when I mean no. And I ardently strove for such a long time to not be that Asian. Yeah. And I strove not to be the Asian who couldn't speak the language. Yeah. And only had Asian friends and only hung out with other Asians. And in the process of that, I lost my Asianness that I never got to experience or inhabit. My Vietnameseness. Yeah. And so it's a very, J. Caspian Kang talks about this in his book, The Loneliest Americans, how as a result of assimilating ourselves in the hopes of getting closer and closer to whiteness, we then not only distance ourselves from ourselves and our own cultural heritages, we also distance ourselves from other black and brown bodies, while at the same time not ever being white. Yeah.
I could feel as you were going there, I just felt so emotional actually, and the words that came to me were like, what I wanted to say is like where you were finding home, like as you began to to find these parts of you that you had disowned. But then, this is part of the trauma is like, but that wasn't home. And I just think you've spoken so brilliantly about that idea of like the loss of something that isn't. Yeah. And it's the absence of, and the grief, like how can you grieve something that you didn't that didn't happen? Yeah. Would you, and I can feel it as when I was kind of flowing with you and thinking like, oh, like coming home, and then then that didn't fit, so I can feel it as painful. But yeah, that is an interesting concept of how do you grieve something that didn't happen?
We have to name it, because we can't grieve something, we can't mourn something unless we name it. And we live in a very concrete society where grief is typically framed as I had something and now it's gone. And now I can wrap my head around your grief and then help you with solutions for that. Yeah,
we're gonna fix that right up.
Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah, and when it comes to these unnameable losses, it's a grief over something I never got. And yet, in my work with adult children of alcoholics, that's where I actually then started to recognise the grief for the inner child, right? The grief for what we didn't get. Yeah. And the pervasive weight of the vastness of that emptiness and the loneliness. I mean, across all forms of attachment disruption is loneliness.
It also makes me think of my understanding of, as a cisgender white woman, I don't know, but the trans experience, like, it was just sort of paralleling that there is what didn't, like, in order to grieve the not being someone's son, like, being able to, this is my son. No, this is, all of that, like, not having this identity that was recognized in the world, even recognized by yourself as a child. Like, the concept of it has to form. And in some ways, the only way that it ever forms is by it being, like, manifest out there, which is some of your work. Is like, let's form it so that you can get to the grieving.
Yes, and let's form that community. Because
the
our
community,
identity,
and even just the idea, or even the feeling of it, or it's like we talked about emergent. It's like the way that I'm thinking. I'm not sure if this is right, but like it kind of like it's not a thing you can point to. It's like you said, this is ambiguous loss. So it's like it begins to form as like there is something there, but it's how do you name what that is, and even without the name, as it takes form, then there's something that you can feel that is missing or there, or that you can relate to. But there is something about it needs to be manifest in the world in order to even know that it's not available. Now I feel like I'm talking in circles, but I think are you following? Am I on the right track?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Help me out.
No, there's so much joy in the struggle, right? There's so much joy in going, yes, you too, you're trying to touch something and it's not there, but you know it's there because you keep reaching for it, knowing that it's supposed to be there, and yet it's so elusive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That piece, if we go back to the piece about if I'm always defending myself, I don't get to define myself. As children, one of the developmental actions of attachment is to be able to push against. Because when I push against you, I know that I am real. Yeah? Because you're pushing back. And if I can push against and have that be distinct from pushing away, then I learn how to set boundaries and have boundaries, as well as how to let go, because I know the difference between pushing against, that it gives me a sense of being real, and pushing away. Yeah? And when it comes to racialized identity, which is, there's so much in terms of child development that's here in amongst all of this, that I'm hoping that I can form solidarity with therapists and with folks who are working their way through their own childhood stuff, right? Is that as someone who inhabits a racialized identity, when I'm busy defending myself, I'm pushing against. And yet that's how I know that I'm real. Yeah. And so can I define myself by pushing against and being met with community?
Met
with a container. And we talk about containers all the time in therapy. Yeah. Can I be met with that? Rather than be met with confusion, judgment,
Aggression, even,
aggression,
right? Aggression.
Yes.
That isn't true. That isn't right.
Minimization, denial, analysis, as well as aspects of other people's unresolved aspects of self that also emerge in the moment. Yeah.
And it gets so messy and pushing against one another. In the mental health field here, as therapists are struggling with this, I really, this notion of shame, and shame being it's kind of the quick go-to that can stop relationship. We had sort of spoken about that.
Yes. Yes, because oftentimes in our bid to push against, so that you push against me so I feel real, what happens? I push against, and other responses are I get pushed away, or I am still pushing because there isn't a container, so I'm trying to find that container, so then I get even more vocal and physical with my pushing in an attempt to get a need met for feeling real. And yet when it isn't met with enough pressure, what emerges in that space of not being met is shame. Yeah. And so that then becomes part of that assaulted sense of self and internalized evaluation as well as internalized devaluation.
Can you say just a little bit more about that? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sure. I'm then constantly assessing what's wrong with me. Like, I'm constantly assessing what's wrong with me. The ways in which I'm not enough or I'm too much. Right, the two core wounds. I'm too much, I'm not enough. How can I shift, reshape who I am in order to get my attachment needs met? But beneath attachment is physical and psychological safety. Yeah. Yeah. And dignity for self-expression. And so
Love you
I'm
going
then,
back to that word, yeah.
Yes. And so then I'm actually always assessing, is it okay for me to be me?
And in that space, I can feel the pain. Again, you said like this, the expansive, I mean, what are the words of the amount of pain that if you really open yourself to some of these things, or even like in ourselves, in our own history, but also the world, and seeing it, witnessing it, really tuning into it. How does one survive knowing and feeling and being with and not all the things that can happen, right? And dissociating again and like, oh, no, can't do that,
Yeah. Well, I believe there's our own individual work to do, but then there's also the communal and the community. And my own journey has been one where by the time I was a young adult, if folks actually had asked me about my Vietnamese heritage or ancestry, I would have looked at them really blankly and said, I don't know. And in that, a whole bunch of shame would have come up, because there's also within culture shame, right, about how I get judged and assessed by other Vietnamese people about the ways in which I've lost my roots. And then I'm a big walking ball of shame and I'm not able to step into that space. And yet at the same time, being able to slowly unpack that has been where, I have such gratitude for the 12-step groups I've been a part of. Because that is shame resiliency. In the words of Brené Brown, I'm sharing my story to those who've earned the right to share my story about addiction. And then in adult children of alcoholics and others raised in dysfunctional families, even though my family was not alcoholic, there wasn't abuse, I still had all of the symptoms. And so I got to share my story with those who had earned the right to hear my story. And yet the longer I stayed in those groups, the more that I saw that there were aspects that weren't being talked about around race and also around war. We don't talk about war and the impact of war. And yet it got me further along in the journey. And then I discovered the work of adult children of Holocaust survivors. Not that I would ever wish to conflate what happened to my people with what happened to Holocaust survivors. And yet there are threads of that landed for me in my experience that caused me to go, oh, my parents are trauma survivors. I had no idea. And I'm living the aftermath of what that means. And so with each stage of the journey or each layer of the unfolding, right, there are parts of myself that begin to open up. So that when I work with other folks who come to me and they say, I'm adamant I'm a white person and that has been my narrative my entire life, I can actually say, yeah, I get that. Yeah. And where shall we begin? Yeah. Because the temptation within a society that has an insecure attachment relationship to time and to productivity is to want to fix and provide the solutions right now. Yeah.
So say more. Insecure attachment to time and productivity and the earth.
Yes.
And as I just am hungry for this, for these concepts, even to be able to get them to form, to form them, to be able to, kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's like there's, say more.
In my own journey, I got so much juiciness from white-bodied people, which is a phrase I take from Res Feminicum, white-bodied folks. And I learned so much from white-bodied psychotherapists and psychotherapy modalities. And attachment theory helped to make my world make a lot more sense. And yet it did nothing to repair the relationship between myself and my parents. And I actually, Kai Cheng Tom was actually the person who raised to my awareness, like very searingly, that psychotherapy is derived from white colonizer settler paradigms and lenses and approaches. And when I heard her say that, I was actually deeply immersed in Brené Brown and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and Stephen Porges and Peter Levine, and Bonnie Badenoch, and the attachment researchers of the generation before them. And yet to pause and to tap into a universality of what secure attachment could possibly mean. Caused me to recognise, and this is Esther Perel's work, right? That relationships is a relationality with all things, with life itself. Not just our relationship with our parents. It's also I think she keeps it mostly to people, and living here on Indigenous land, there was something that healed for me that I didn't realise was missing. Right? It's a secure attachment to the earth, to nature, to the seasons and the rhythms of nature and the seasons. How to grow food and where it comes from, and how to tend to the earth, and how to hunt and fish and grow and preserve and take what I need and only what I need. Yeah. And right in there, that small bit there, is to recognise that I had learned a survival-oriented relationship to my needs. Yeah, that when I experience a need, I go, no, I don't. I don't have needs. What are you talking about? And when that need becomes overwhelming, I then go into fight or flight about that need. You're either on my side or you're in my way. Yeah, and then I project that onto other people, and I dismiss other people and their needs as being needy. And or I mistake love as you being able to attune to and connect to and fulfill my needs without me needing to ask for it. Because if you loved me, I wouldn't have to ask. So a secure relating with my own needs and the needs of others, the needs of the planet. Yeah. Secure relating with ancestors, and not just ancestors who are bloodline ancestors. There's also professional ancestors and religious ancestors and spiritual ancestors and the teachers of my teachers and my ancestors with a capital A, right? The elemental ancestors of earth and wind and fire and warmth and water. And when I'm up in the mountains of Alaska on all fours and drinking from a mountain stream, with just my mouth making contact with the water and my hands and legs on the earth, I'm connecting with the ancestors who are caribou and grass and the rain from the rainbow or through the rainbow that becomes a stream that then moves on into the river valley that becomes a glacier. Right? These capital A ancestors. And then there's secure relating to culture. And there's an ancient technology that weaves its way through all cultures. It's song, movement, storytelling or stories, and silence. So to relate securely with these aspects of culture and cultural heritage, as well as the rituals which are the containers for song and movement and story and silence that mark the passage across the course of a human lifetime, as well as the containers of language and customs and food and ways of being and moving in this world that give us a sense of kinship as well as ancestry and ancestral lineage. And then there's secure attachment relating to my body and to bodies, to touch, to a fecund and sensuous relationship with life around me, in the words of Francis Weller, where I can feel, right, the dew on a fiddlehead fern and smell it. And smell the air that dew has passed through and the earth that dew has emerged from. Yeah, this sensuality. And living life through our senses as another way of knowing and relating. And then there's, with the body, it's also secure relating to pleasure. to rest, to sleep, to joy, to work. Yeah. And to time. Because all of this decolonized perspective on secure attachment is a cosmology, it's a worldview, it's a way of being. And within that, particularly that secure attachment relating to time, which becomes disrupted within our capitalistic societies, I then know my place in the bigger scheme of things. Yeah. And when we don't experience place, where we belong in the greater scheme of things, then we become really busy trying to find our place and secure our place. And we live in a world that says, hey, let me give you legitimacy. With these letters after your name, with this next certificate, with this pay rise and a job title change, with a change in role. For some of us, becoming a parent is actually a way of becoming more legitimate in the world. And in the eyes of our parents, we might get given more legitimacy in the world. Yeah. And yet that striving for legitimacy, yeah, can be born from a sense of not having experienced place. And so I feel ever so grateful for my journey of having been displaced and uprooted in such a way that's proximate and yet distant, meaning that I was 2 years old. That has allowed me to experience the reverberations and aftermath and work through them in such a way that maybe perhaps it might be an offering to someone out there in the world.
Well, I think it absolutely, positively is. I'm, in rapture. Just because one of the things I love about how you speak about these things as a disruptor is that you are able to do it in a way that other people aren't resourced enough. Or another way of saying that is, as you were describing kind of the achievement and, all of us on the rabbit wheel, and that's all that we know, that's where we've been pointed. So there's a way that you really hold that and acknowledge that as you're also striving to disrupt that you're kind of saying, and I hope I can be part two of saying, like, there's more, there's other paths, there's other ways. And but those ideas and the pointers and it has to form, and that's I think seems like your journey is like to help this alternative mode of relating and being and finding oneself and coming together as to create that as a possibility, because I don't know that it's a possibility when you look up and the carrot's right in front of you and you just keep going because that's where you're supposed to go. But I love the gentleness that you talk about it, so that, wherever we find ourselves on this path, even under-resourced parents who are also traumatized, that, there's a way of like seeing them and telling the truth about what happened, but also really kind of holding them at the same time. It's just a really, it feels like what we need as a culture to be able to name it without the blowing it up.
Yeah.
Is that right, or is that me being too soft about it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, am I saying, we should all be nice as we try to do these things, which I don't want to be saying? That is not what I mean. I'm good with blowing things up if needed. But that there's something, I guess, about aggression and assertiveness and kind of like you said earlier, pushing
Yeah.
versus pushing away. So
Yeah.
just,
Yes. You know, I think there's room for look, something I say all the time is right message, wrong delivery is wrong message. Right message, wrong timing is wrong message. Yeah. And in amongst the world of social justice voices, there are times when my nervous system is up here. Yeah. And I'm full of passion. And yet it's very easy for other nervous systems to misinterpret my passion as aggression or aggressiveness. It's very easy to misinterpret excitement as I'm going to be overwhelmed by that. Yeah. And there have been times when my nervous system is down here and I'm pacing things more slowly. And there are other nervous systems in the space that are like, come on, I want you to ramp it up. Like, give it to me with a passionate delivery. Yeah. And so I get and I hold with so much love that we each have different nervous systems. Yeah. And to be able to just hold that. And to find the resource that you need for you, the resource that I need for me, so that I can continue to be myself and know that I am enough in this world as I am. Yeah. Yeah. And I hope that it can be okay that today I have a gentle delivery. And that it doesn't get misinterpreted as, you know, a weaponizing of calmness and a lack of passion for the topic. I also get that for many folks out there, being able to hear some of the things that I've said today in, like, with the nervous system I'm currently inhabiting, is actually the delivery that is meeting your nervous system. Yeah. Yeah. And if that is what you learn from today, I mean, this is something I've been cognizant of for a while, is that when I learn how I learn, I can learn anything. Yeah. And as someone who started out teaching meditation and teaching yoga, I was taught that teaching is the art of observation. So when I learn how you learn, I can teach you anything. And more importantly, when I learn how you learn, I can teach you how you learn, and then you can go and learn anything you want to learn.
So let me just ask a point of clarification. So when I said a moment ago about that balance between disruptive and did I come across as saying that there was anything wrong with your delivery? Did you hear? Okay.
No.
Because when you went there, I was like, oh no, that's not what I meant. But see how it happens.
It happens so fast.
So I just wanted to check it out. It's like, that would be terrible. It's like you're
Not
Good.
at all, Sue. Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, I love this dance, and I know that many people that are listening are just as moved as I am. And can you, what are next steps? Where would you direct people? The folks that are just excited and like, yes, that.
Yeah. So, let's see here. Okay, I'm going to pause and land into
Yes.
that which is emergent for me. If I land into emergence and I speak into that which is emergent for me, what my invitation would be to invite you to step into that emergence for yourself, right? Whatever emerges for you. Because when we can name that which emerges, what happens is then the world will present us with the next piece. Yeah, and the world is actually always presenting us with the next piece. We just don't see it because we're not in alignment with emergence. Yeah.
I love your answer, by the way, because it puts it. Otherwise, there's just a new carrot.
Yes.
There's right, and you took the carrot away, and it's like, no, the carrot isn't here. Mm-hmm. And the carrot's different for everybody. Like, there's not a carrot. I don't even know if that's the right metaphor anymore. It's more of tuning in, and I really get that. It puts, it's our responsibility. There's not just something to sign up for or something to go do. that it really is this practice of, we talk about it on the shows, like secure related to like come back to yourself, like being your right size. You don't have to be bigger. You don't have to stand on your tippy toes. You don't have to run. You don't have to, you know what I mean? You don't have to shrink and huddle. It's like, what is your right size right now? And so I think a little bit of different language, but the same thing. It's like, what's emergent for you, the listener, as you're hearing now? Like, we know, like, it's right there. There's no way someone that we have, out here, a disembodied voice can tell you. And that's what I so admire, is you didn't take the bait of that question and you were able to pull it back in. It's like, it's inward. I'm not gonna give you a link or a book or a program. So thank you for that. I think that's very consistent with the conversation and the message. Like, it's more of a discovery, like, discover what's next. I don't know what's next for you.
Yes, and I love that word discovery and the process and the journey of self-discovery. So many people come to therapy, and I see this with my clients. They want me to get to know them, and I name that, and I then name, therapy is the process of you getting to know you. And within all of this, it's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. And within all of this, right, whether the conversation is about racism or sexism or ableism or transphobism, is the opportunity and the possibility and the invitation that white-bodied folks, that cisgender folks, that heterosexual folks, that able-bodied folks, that you'll actually get to know more about yourself in this process.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing there's nothing special. There's just a different I just think about the person on the treadmill that's successful is still missing. So, I mean, again, it's like you don't even know what you're missing. When we work with men and trying to get, especially, white men who have, are just part of the patriarchy in the sense that they've absorbed it and they're injured too, because they haven't had the benefit of the feedback right away, or the immediate pressing back in the way that many of us have. That there's so much, there's pain no matter where you're coming from, what direction it is that you're coming from. It's not the same. It's not like, it's not equating anything, but I like that position because it's, there's compassion all the way around. Yes. With the limit of, don't keep hurting, stop the intrusion. Mm-hmm. And
And
I didn't want to get on a roll.
No, it's okay.
So I stopped myself. Those bastards out there. that defeats what I was trying to say. But it's. I really do mean that. That we're all injured by it, and so I'm glad for the inclusive language at the end around. It doesn't, even if you heteronormative, able-bodied, the script. If you fit the script, it's still uniquely a loss of so many parts of you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 And the willingness to become transformed by the process of what you will discover about yourself, or what one discovers about oneself. Yeah, that's the joy. That's the joy.
Mm-hmm.
That's the joy in allyship. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Allowing, willing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's
discovering.
Discovery. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the difference between performative allyship, right, and true allyship. And it's a process. It's a process. It's my parents turning around and saying to me, I wanted to grow as a result of bringing you into this world. Yeah. Yeah. And that willingness to grow means growing pains and discomfort, and the willingness to reckon with that.
Mm-hmm. And to not know, and to let go of all of these things that have shielded us and buffered us and privileged us and protected us. Mm-hmm. It's courageous.
So, yes, it is. And I'm so grateful that you invited me onto your show, Sue.
Well, I cannot tell you. I've been really excited about this, and I just want to sort of sit at your knee and just keep listening. But there are ways to. You have many things that you do to spread this incredible wisdom. We speak just briefly to that, and let us know how to tap in. Those of the listeners that would like more from you specifically.
Yes, I have a website, www.linda-ty.com. Please sign up for the newsletter. I don't do one of those sales pitchy newsletters. I do one of those newsletters of what I'm up to and what I'm unlearning and what is nourishing me, and the things that I offer into the world, some of which is paid for and some of which is free to the public, some of which is sponsored by other agencies or organisations. And so there's ways in which to connect and keep in touch with me. And in the newsletters, I also celebrate the work of other people out there. So it's not one of those, here, let me sell you something and tell you all about how awesome I am in terms of my expert knowledge.
It is not a sales funnel.
No.
Right.
Is that the fancy word?
That's the fancy word. Click here to get this free something or another, and then you put in your email. It's terrible.
Yeah, it is terrible.
Well, it is. It's the carrot again. The carrot.
Yes.
So that's wonderful. So we will put all of that in the show notes and any other resources that you share with me. So be sure and look for the show notes at therapistsuncensored.com / actually go to therapistsuncensored.com, and then there's a search function, and you can put anything that you want to know about. But Linda Ty, Thai, is who has blessed us with her experience and wisdom, and we also want to acknowledge that it is a real gift for you to share your story. That is, it's not something that you have to do, and really appreciate that. For those of you who, I lost my train of thought, so. Well, I was just really feeling like, we don't always, this is a real privilege. And so I don't know, I'm really touched by it, and we'll be following you, and we will definitely promote this video very much. This podcast, because it's a real benefit. We want everyone every listener. We have 7,000 downloads now. We want 7,000 new ears on this. 7 million. We have 7 million downloads. We want another 7 million ears on this message, because it's healing. It's healing to the world. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us and for sticking through this beautiful conversation. And we really encourage you to share it with someone that you feel could benefit. And that's all I'm going to ask. Is just share the word. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll see you around the bend. Thank you. This is awesome. I'll be in touch. I'll send it to you when we, when it publishes. And, yeah, if there's anything in the world, that I could do for you, or that you want to get the word out or anything like that, I'd be happy to do it. So count me in.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Sue.